$180,000 for a lollipop person. It's going to happen in Queensland sooner rather than later. And the Master Builders Association are red hot because, look, I don't have a problem with workers getting extra cash. If you can get it, good luck to you. But how the hell is it being offered? How has this become the new standard? Let's be honest. Think about your job. Think about how hard you had to work for your job. Think about how hard you work in your small business. I bet you're not making $180,000 for going slow, go, 1 second, slow, go. I mean, honestly, that's it. That's the job, okay? Anyway, we had a chat to Paul Bidwell a bit earlier today. He's in Brizzy.
Well, that's the rate that was negotiated for the two mega projects in the Brisbane CBD, the Cross River Rail project and Queen's Wharf. But the bit that really infuriates us is that they're now going to translate those rates up into Cairns. So ignoring whatever the market rate is in Cairns, those pay rates will apply in Cairns, despite the fact that traffic controller in Cairns, the market rate is probably closer to 90,000, so half of what they would be paid under these minimum conditions.
Now, look, I don't begrudge the worker. If somebody's going to offer it to you, take it. But how do we get here? Is this because in order to work with construction unions, basically everyone in it gets a pay rise, and that means that the bump exists from the person who's hanging off the skyscraper to the person doing the stop-go? Because I think a lot of people watching at home, they just can't understand how we got to even, dare I say, $90,000, let alone $180,000.
Look, that's part of it. The state government has a very convoluted procurement process, and last year they introduced something called best practice principles, which of itself aren't too bad. So they've got best practice industrial relations, workplace health and safety, meeting your training requirements that really required contractors on these big projects, so these are things over $100 million, to meet certain requirements. So, and we could live with that. And then lo and behold, a couple of months ago, they said, well, for best practice industrial relations, we're going to have something called minimum conditions, and we're going to trial that on the Cairns Convention Centre extension. So that's a $180 million project. And what these minimum conditions reflect is pay rates from the Brisbane CBD. So they bear no relation to what people get paid in Cairns. So the traffic controller example is that $180,000. But if you also look at a carpenter, so a trade carpenter, the award rate is about $91,000. And in Cairns, let's say the market rate is $105,000 to $110,000. But if this goes through, so if these minimum conditions apply on that project, the trade carpenter will be getting paid $230,000.
Blimey.
So it bears no relation to what's going on in the Cairns labour market. And if this is applied on these major projects or these best practice projects, then those pay rates would apply across Queensland in wherever these projects occur, now, irrespective of what those labour market conditions are.
What's the consequences of these pretty crazy numbers?
Well, there are two, really. The first one is any companies that do federal government work have to comply with their procurement code. And we think, or we are very concerned that by signing up to these minimum conditions, contractors would run afoul of the federal procurement code, which means they couldn't do federal work. So that is a major stumbling block for the contractors that are looking at tendering for the Cairns Convention Centre. They don't want to be locked out of doing federal work, and we're working through that now with the ABCC. So that's the first point. The second one is, why would the government spend more money than they have to on projects? Why wouldn't they build more things, invest the additional money in doing more projects, employing more people, rather than paying more for individual projects, tipping more money into the pockets of those people that are on those jobs?
So, Paul, last question here. The relationship between the Queensland Government and unions is thick as thieves. Is this going to make it just almost impossible to do business in Queensland?
Well, you've got to contend with these sorts of conditions, these pay rates. And, I mean, ultimately, it's the taxpayers of Queensland that are going to pay. So if this goes ahead, and it is only a trial, but if it's applied more widespreadly across all of these so-called major projects that the best practice principles apply to, then the Queensland taxpayers will be paying more than they have to, more than the market conditions that exist in those places where these projects will take place.